Moving on quickly to our next session on 1971 war. The name itself resonates with many people differently. Our panelists, including Major General Ian Cardozo, K.S. Nair, and Major General Jagatbir Singh, bring their profound insights and experiences to shed light on the events of 1971. From the gripping tales of survivors to an in depth analysis of the Bangladesh Liberation War, the Mukti Bahini, this discussion promises to offer a unique perspective on a transformative year. May I please request the panelists to join me on stage, calling one by one. Major General Ian Cardozo, AVSM, SM retired. Sir, can I please have you on stage? We can clap for the gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. K.S. Nair, can I please have you on stage, sir? Major General Jagatbir Singh, VSM retired. Can I please have you on stage, sir? The session will be moderated by Major General V.K. Singh, retired.
Without wasting time, since all of you have read the profiles of the speakers, I will straight away ask them to start. So we'll start with General Cardozo. I think, sir, we should take about 15 minutes each. Yeah. I suggest let all of us finish, then I'll ask the questions. I think that's a better thing. Whatever way you prefer, if you want to, I'll ask you at the end of your session. Okay, I'll do that. So let us start off. We are already behind time, and 3 o'clock I have to go and speak in another session in Zorawar. So maybe you will have to delay that or get another moderator. Okay, sir, kindly take on.
Yeah, I would just like to say that this is a military institution. We need to start on time. We need to finish on time. If a session spills over, then it means that the next session is going to get less time and unnecessary hassles take place. So I don't know who to tell. So I thought you were going to ask me a question and I'd answer. Okay. The first issue I'd like to talk about is why did I write this book? And this book is The Sinking of INS Khukri. It's the story of the Indian Navy and what it did in 1971. At some point of time after 1971, I found that there were many stories about ground operations, what the army did in 1971. I also wrote a book about it. But then I found that the Indian Navy, which had done so much in 1971, there was no story about them. They did a great job in the Arabian Sea. They did a great job in the Bay of Bengal, but their story had not been told. Navies the world over are known as the silent service. I decided to break that silence and tell the world exactly what happened. And I wrote that book about what the Navy did, about the great captain of INS Khukri and the tremendous example he set for us. And the chief of the naval staff, Admiral Arun Prakash, stated that it required an army officer to tell the story of the Indian Navy. So that was a great compliment, and I was very happy that I wrote this book. But before we talk about what happened in 1971, I think we need to go back into what happened in 1965. In 1965, Indonesia decided that, they made various comments and said, why is this called the Indian Navy, the Indian Ocean? We need to call it the Indonesian Ocean. And why do the Andaman and Nicobar Islands be part of India? It should be part of Indonesia. So all this was going on, and they decided to capture part of the islands of the Nicobar chain. So the Indian Navy was ordered and focused to look after the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And then when the Pakistan Navy on the western seaboard, sorry, the Indian Navy was told, you will not launch offensive operations in the Arabian Sea. You will not proceed further than the parallel of 24 degrees latitude that passes through Dwarka. And so Admiral Soman, the naval chief at that time, felt most insulted, and he asked for an interview with the Raksha Mantri, Mr. Chavan. And Mr. Chavan told me, no, sorry, you do what you're told. So he said, sorry, I don't agree with you. Can I meet the Prime Minister? So the Prime Minister was Lal Bahadur Shastri. And so the next day he met Lal Bahadur Shastri and Chavan, and Lal Bahadur Shastri said, sorry, we don't want to enlarge the war. So you keep looking at the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and that's it. So Admiral Soman said, but what sort of a message are we passing to the Indian people and to Pakistan? They said, that's none of your business. You look after the Bay of Bengal. So what happened? The Pakistan Navy bombarded Dwarka, and they made a big song and dance about it, and we could do nothing. So the Navy was most incensed about it. But unfortunately, the government of India did not tell the people of India that the Indian Navy did not fight in the Arabian Sea because of our orders. But ultimately, this had a good effect because Admiral Nanda at that time, who was in Bombay, was very, very upset about this. And he said, I know Karachi like the back of my hand, and I will set Karachi on fire. And in 1971, that's exactly what he did. Karachi burnt for 7 days and 7 nights. So ultimately, perhaps we made a challenge into an opportunity, and we did a great job. So this is the first part of my question of why I wrote the book. And perhaps you'd like the others to talk about that, why did they write the book, and I'll come back to. Arey Baba. Okay, so I'm on the spot, yeah. So what happened? Admiral Nanda, a most brilliant and aggressive commander, the government of India, I sometimes wonder why India only reacts. We only react to what Pakistan does. We only react to what China does. Why do we have a vision? Do we have a vision of where will India be politically, militarily, socially, economically, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years? We need to have our own vision. We need to know what we need to do to keep India safe. Morgenthau said, the country or the nation which rules the seas rules the world. India is not bothered or desirous of ruling the world. All that we need to do is to protect our own interests. That's it. So, what are these issues which were involved? Now, let's come to what actually happened. So, what actually happened was Admiral Nanda was not very clear about what the Navy should do, and he wanted a sanction from the government of India. By this time, we had a great prime minister, we had a great army chief, Sam Manekshaw and Indira Gandhi, and he got his cue that yes, we need to do something about the 10 million refugees which came into India. And the Navy was part of what had to happen. But he wanted a clear direction from the government. So he went to Indira Gandhi and said, Madam Prime Minister, we need to do something to ensure that this sort of a thing doesn't happen on the seas. So she said, so what do you want to do? So he said, I think we need to take the war into Karachi. So she said, well, what has to be done has to be done. So he got his cue. And Admiral Nanda attacked Karachi in the Arabian Sea. It was a fantastic operation. But we need to know, at that time, Pakistan, the submarines of Pakistan were the best submarines in the world. What we did not know, that the PNS Hangor, the Daphne class submarine of Pakistan, was waiting outside Bombay, waiting for an order from Pakistan to destroy the Indian Navy as it came out of Bombay. Admiral Nanda got wind of what Pakistan wanted. He flew down to Bombay, talked to all the officers and the men, and said, get out of this harbor because I don't want the ships to be destroyed here. And the whole Western fleet moved out of Bombay harbor, and the Hangor was lying in wait. But the war had not started. So they didn't know what to do. 6 hours before war was declared, the whole Western fleet passed over the Hangor, and the Hangor was not able to function. The Indian Navy, the Western Fleet, went on to Karachi. Going back to what happened in 65, when Dacca was bombed, the ship which bombed Dwarka, the destroyer, was PNS Khyber. And now, when the Indian Navy was going towards Karachi, the Khyber was patrolling the seas of Karachi, and it was hit by our missiles. They did not know what hit them. The missiles were the magic instrument of war, which won for the Navy an unimaginable success. It was followed by Musafir. It was followed by the Venus and the Challenger, 2 ammunition-carrying ships. The oil tanker of Pakistan was destroyed, and the Kyamari oil fields of Pakistan were set on fire. So this was, the Pakistan Navy did not know what had happened. And they bolted into Karachi harbor, and they refused to fight. The great thing which happened is that without a blockade means naval ships have to be there to prevent any other ships from entering the harbor. At that time, so great was our victory in the Arabian Sea that there were no naval ships outside Karachi, but no merchant ship from any country in the world was allowed to enter Karachi. They had to take permission from Delhi. So this is what the Indian Navy was able to do on the Arabian Sea. On the eastern seaboard, the Indian Navy frogmen, assisted by the Mukti Bahini, destroyed many ships, 3 patrol boats of the Pakistan Navy, and any number of merchant ships, and prevented the 93,000 prisoners which we captured from going over and exiting from the eastern seaboard to go to Burma and Thailand and Singapore and all those countries. So the Indian Navy did a great, great job. Now I've been told that I've got to finish whatever I have to say. So what are the lessons that we learn from the Indian Navy's tremendous performance on both the western and the eastern seaboards? Firstly, we need to understand the Indian peninsula projects into the Indian Ocean in a very strategic manner. It can control the sea lanes from the Gulf of Hormuz to the Straits of Malacca. It is very important that we dominate the Indian Ocean because nature abhors the vacuum. If there is a vacuum, somebody else will fill it. And who is that somebody? It's China. So unless we are strong, unless we have a very strong navy, unless we can patrol the Indian Ocean and ensure that we are the prime force in this area, we are going to be in trouble. Therefore, it is important, that's the first lesson that we need to learn, that we need to control the sea lanes because that is important and vital to our own security. The second is the type of equipment that the Indian Navy has. Amongst the three services, the Indian Navy is far ahead of the Indian Army and far ahead of the Indian Air Force. It's the service which has had a vision, it's gone ahead and is manufacturing its own ships and is doing a great job. But we need to do more. In the 1971 war, we had a frigate, minesweeper frigate squadron consisting of the Khukri, the Kirpan, and one more, the Kothar. Now, these were obsolete ships given to us by Britain, and the Indian Navy had no business to use them against the high-class Daphne-class submarines. And therefore, we need to ensure that the Indian Navy is never again allowed to put an obsolete fleet against our opponents. And lastly, we have the issue of technology. The Khukri had a sonar which I hope you know what a sonar is. A sonar is an instrument which can detect enemy submarines or enemy warships. The range of the sonar, and it was an experimental sonar, but had a range of just 2,500 meters. Whereas the Angkor, the Daphne-class submarines, had sonars which extended to 25,000 meters. So while the Daphne, the Angkor could see quite clearly as what the Khukri and the Kirpan, but the Kothar was not there. What the Khukri and the Kirpan were doing, the Khukri and the Kirpan were blind. And so the Angkor was able to destroy the Khukri, and that was something which should never have happened. But I think things are getting better now, and I hope our standard of technology, which is very, very good now, I believe, will not let such an incident happen again. And lastly, I want to talk about the captain of the Khukri, Captain Mullah. When the Khukri was sinking, he gave his life jacket to a sailor. He went down with his ship because he said, "How can I save my life when my own sailors, 200 of them, are locked below, in the holds below?" His character, his example needs to be looked at, and we need to follow that example. He was a colossus as far as his values, as far as his moral courage was much in evidence. And that is the story of the sinking of the INS Khukri and the operations which were launched by the Indian Navy in the Arabian Sea, which were not much talked about at that time and which needs to be known a lot more now. And I think I'll sign off here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir, for a very eliminating talk, and also for sticking to the time. That is also more important. So now we go on to the next speaker, that is Mr. Nair. But if there is anybody from the organizers, I would like to be told whether I should continue as a moderator or I can hand over to General Cardozo and go for the next session where I am a speaker.
You can see that some of us have one foot in the grave and another on a banana skin.
Thank you, sirs. Thank you, USI, Manekshaw Centre, and all of you here for the opportunity to talk to you. I will, with your permission, before I take 5 minutes on my own point, I will just add a point or two to what General Cardozo has told us about the loss of the Khukri. I think to add to what he said, that the Khukri was carrying an experimental sonar, an indigenous sonar, and that was itself quite an accomplishment at the time. We had started building, we had designed and built indigenous sonars to replace some quite elderly electronic equipment that was on the 3 ships that made up the class that the Khukri belonged to. So it was an indigenous sonar, and to add to the Khukri's ill luck, I think a sonar works by picking up sound. Right? So it is at its most effective when a ship is steaming slowly or even still and not zigzagging. Standard anti-submarine practice is to zigzag. When you know that there are submarines in the vicinity, standard anti-submarine practice is to zigzag. The Khukri was not zigzagging. And the Khukri was not zigzagging because they wanted to give the indigenous sonar that they were carrying the best chance of picking up an enemy submarine. So that adds another small item of trivia to General Cardozo's story about the Khukri.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Nair. But I would also like to say that there are people today, armchair strategists, sitting in their air-conditioned offices, who are critical of Captain Mullah. Mr. Nair has given you a very good reason why he was not zigzagging. But he couldn't because of that experimental sonar. So when you talk about what happened in those days, please understand the pressures under which Captain Mullah was under.
Thank you, sir. Well, ladies and gentlemen, to my own sort of stories about the 1971 war. As many of you know, I've also written a book about the 1971 war and several articles. And I've tried to cover many of the aspects that I have no doubt that the generals surrounding me will talk about. We've heard from General Cardozo about the submarine war. We will hear, I'm sure, from General Jagatbir Singh about the accomplishments of the Armored Corps. And there is no shortage of great war stories coming out of the 1971 war. In my book, which is 400 pages long, there are plenty of those great war stories as well. But I also want to add a perspective on the 1971 war, which in my view, much as we celebrate the 1971 war, has not received enough attention. Now, I am the only person on this stage who has not actually served. Right? I'm a civilian, although my father, my father-in-law, and an uncle were all in the services and have something like 85 years of service between them, including during the 71 war. But I myself did not serve, but I do therefore have the advantage of being able to say some things without necessarily having to clear it with my reporting officer. So the things I'm going to say are essentially that think about it this way. I think for all its flaws and all its issues, I think we all know that the United States is something of a beacon to other countries. And it has a very effective Supreme Court. It has very effective separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary. And it's by and large spoken up for freedom, except on a few occasions, which we won't go into. But you think about this scenario. The United States, the beacon of freedom for all the world, allies with a military dictatorship And the purpose of that military dictatorship of that alliance with the military dictatorship is to curry favor with the second largest communist party in the world. And in order to do so, to curry favor, to ally with a military dictatorship, to curry favor with the second largest communist party in the world, they opposed the interests of what was already pretty close to being the largest democracy in the world. Now that is exactly what happened in 1971. The United States aligned itself with Pakistan, not for any other reason, but because Pakistan was acting as the go-between in enabling them to open up a diplomatic relationship with China. China did not become a member of the United Nations till October 1971, 2 months before the war. And Henry Kissinger, who was at that time the National Security Advisor to the United States government, later became the Secretary of State. Henry Kissinger saw it as his great accomplishment would be to open up diplomatic relations with China, which was then the most populous country in the world. So that was the global diplomatic driver that drove the United States alliance, the United States to institutionally at least support Pakistan during the 1971 war. And I make no apologies for putting it this way. Apologies to any of you who are any Americans in the audience, and to any of you whose children are somewhere in the pipeline to acquire American citizenship. But America's position, the United States' position in the 1971 war, was as completely on the wrong side of history as it is possible to be. Right? And I will go on and say for India, that my argument about the way the 1971 war is represented in India is that too often it is represented as simply a slugging match between India and Pakistan, and we emerged on top. There was far more to it than that. The Bangladeshis were not just mere bystanders. They have been fighting that war for 8 months before India got involved on a shooting basis. Although we were involved on a quiet basis for a couple of months before. And I will say, in response to a point that General Cardozo made, that we'd actually started actively planning for the war from April 1971 onwards. The Pakistanis cracked down on the Bangladeshis and started that horrible shooting in Dacca University from the night of the 25th of March 1971. India had its first cabinet meeting where they discussed the prospect of going to war to help to stop an atrocity, a genocide, for which the word genocide is not too far off the mark. So we started talking about that in April 1971. So I would say that the 1971 war was different from every other war that India has fought in this respect. It is the only one of our wars which did not take us by surprise. We knew it was coming, we prepared for it, and we did have the vision to prepare for it. And finally, I will just say that the 1971 war meets all the criteria. And there are serious philosophers, not Indians, there are serious philosophers and ethicists and people who've studied the laws of war and the ethics of war on a very deep basis, who've come up with a 3 or 4 step process to define whether a war is a just war or not. The 1971 war, India comes out as being on the side of the angels and in an impeccably just war, an impeccably necessary and justifiable war without any argument. Right? So I think those are the broad points about the 1971 war, which I've, as I say, I've written a 400-page book about the 1971 war, and 300 pages of it is about some of the daring do that General Cardozo and General Jagatbir Singh and almost everyone here can tell us some stories about. But I've spent about 80 pages talking about these aspects which I think get overlooked. And I think it only strengthens India's case to moral leadership and to the moral high ground, especially during the 1971 war, if you look at those aspects. So, sir, I think I will stop there.
Great insights. If I may add a little bit to what you said, you're so correct. You said you're the only war we are prepared for. And so also to add to your point of leadership earlier on, I very often say that the date in which the 1971 war was won was on the 28th of April 1971. Because that is the day when you mentioned the cabinet meeting took place, when General Manekshaw was there, and he was told by Mrs. Gandhi, I want you to go into East Pakistan now. And he turned around and said, Madam, I guarantee you 100% defeat if we go now. And like he puts it, there was a shocked silence in the audience. And Jagjeevan Ram, who was the defense minister, prodded him and said, Sam, manjana. He refused, and when the audience trooped out, he said, I was the last, being the junior most. She called him and said, Sam, पूरे parliament के सामने आपको मुझे ये नहीं कहना था. And then, like a great military leader that he was, he gave the sound military reasons why we can launch the operations only after 15th of November. And sir, that coordination, that preparation is the reason we won the war on the 20th of April, 1971. Jagat sir, if I may add a small point to what you said, sir, we are all landlubbers speaking about the naval aspects, and I've got some naval friends looking at me like this. But one I want to bring out, sir, is what was the raid on Dwarika by the Pakistan Navy on the 8th of September 1965. When we launched our own raid on the 4th of December and the 8th of December on Karachi, the greatest ever, which is we celebrated our Navy Day. 8th September is Pakistan Navy Day. 8 battleships of the Pakistan Navy participated on that raid, including PNS Khyber, PNS Shah Jahan, and the fleet tanker Venus Challenger. All three of them were sunk or damaged on our raising to the Navy Day on the 4th of December, the raid in 1971. So I could say we celebrate our Navy Day with far greater fireworks.
Another small item of trivia to add to the fact that we went in on the 4th of December, the night after war was declared. The missile boat squadron, the killers unit as they're called, they were actually prepared to go in. They had briefed to go in the same night that war was declared. Now, what had happened on the 3rd of December was when Pakistan launched its airstrikes on our airfields, which is what effectively formally kicked off the war, although there'd been some shooting before then. When they launched their airstrikes on Indian airfields, Mrs. Gandhi was actually in the air on a flight back from Calcutta to Delhi. And it wasn't until she'd landed, been met by her staff, had met with the army, with General Manekshaw and the army chief. It was only after that that we, going through a full constitutional process, got the president, Mr. V.V. Giri, to sign the proclamation of war. That actually happened after midnight. So it was too late for the missile boats to set out that night, and that is why they hit Karachi on the 4th rather than on the 3rd night itself.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir, for what you had to say about your book. It was wonderful listening to you. So I'll quickly, I know we're short of time. So firstly, the background of this book, Armour 71, very clear, Armour operations in 1971. I was only a co-author of this. Sagat is also sitting here. We are 4 of us who wrote this as part of the Cavalry Officers Association. And apart from the 4 of us, there were a few people who contributed to the book also, including because we wanted a holistic view. So we had retired ambassadors writing for us. We also had a retired officer from Bangladesh because we wanted to cover the Mukti Bahini portion of it. We also cover the air aspects and the naval aspects, which have been covered in this book. The book is available downstairs. Now, when we got about writing the book, there were actually, when you start writing history of a particular period, particularly of 71 or any period like that, there are actually 4 accounts you have to look at. Firstly, are the books which are already published. That is the official version, and well as the books written by people who participated in the conflict. The second thing was we had access to the what we call the war diaries or the regimental records of units which had participated in it. The third thing is when you had stories of people who actually participated in that conflict. And the fourth thing which we were able to get, but that was entirely from open sources, were how the Pakistanis in our case looked at us. So we read what General Jahangir Karamat had to say. We read what others had to say, where they felt they had gone wrong. So we were able to put all this together. And all of us, none of us had participated in the conflict, but we were able to talk to people who had participated in the conflict. But unfortunately, what I must highlight to everybody, my own unit was very much there in the conflict. They were in Ganganagar. But everybody I spoke to in my unit at that time all had a different story. The 2 squadron commanders had a different tale. The 2IC looked at it differently. The adjutant at that time looked at it differently. So these are issues that take place when you get down to writing any book at a time like that. The book covers in detail the armor operations that took place in the Eastern Front as well as the Western Front. Now, just to bring to point I'll go back a little bit into the history of the Armored Corps. At partition, we were 18 regiments. Now, all the regiments in the Armored Corps at that time were fixed classes within a regiment. That means A squadron, B squadron, C squadron had troops which belonged to one particular class. Now, they were all mixed in such a manner that you could have a Sikh squadron, you could have a Rajput squadron, and you had a Pathan Muslim squadron or a Muslim squadron, Khemkhani squadron, whatever. So, at partition, these 12 regiments remained in India, 6 went to Pakistan, but squadrons changed from one unit to the other. So, this is something you have to understand. Why I'm coming to this is by the time we reached 1965, Pakistan from their 6 had reached 17 regiments. India from 12 had reached 16 regiments. The eye was not on expansion of the Indian Armored Corps at that time. The expansion of Indian Armored Corps took place after 1965. And after 1965, from 16, we went to 26 regiments. Units started being raised in quick succession, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69. And we had out of the 26, one regiment was a missile regiment. So it wasn't never even had tanks. And it was a 70 armored regiment, SS-11B1. That was the missile they had. At 65, we had an armored division and we had one independent armored brigade, which was 2nd Independent Armored Brigade. That's how we fought. We were surprised by Pakistan having 2 armored divisions opposite us. By the time we went into 71, large-scale expansion had taken place. But of these 26 regiments, 23 were in the Western Front, 3 were in the Eastern Front. Eastern Front, salience or geography was in our favor. So we went in from 4 directions. One direction, of course, there was no armor coming in. We also had certain independent squadrons and independent recce squadrons. Eastern Front, there were independent armored squadrons operating. The recce squadrons were in the Western Front. So this is how it was. And most people don't know it. But what happened was you had a mix of units. And the mix of units happened because you had mix of equipment, PT-76 and T-55. And there was a commander armored corps, Brig Armour, he was called, that time Brigadier Gurcharan Sandhu, who was commanding 3 armored brigade. Then he was sidestepped as Brig Armour, and 3 armored brigade was moved under right to the other side, to the Western Front. That's how it happened at that time. Things were moving very, very fast. But 3 armored regiments were split in a way. 63 cavalry was one side, 69 was with 63 was the other, 45 was one side, 63, 69, and the independent squadron which was under 4 Corps, which came in with General Sagat Singh. And towards the end of the campaign, right, you can say around 14th, 15th of December, when the 2 Corps was making headway, Khulla, Jessore, and they had gone over Hilli in this side, 33 Corps, these regiments were asked to pull back, to get back, get into trains at Malda, 63 cavalry, and move to the Western Front. So, I mean, this is the...
That is very
it's very interesting.
Very few of us
very few people know how this matrix took place. Now, the chief at that time was very clear on one thing, General Manekshaw. He said that as far as the Eastern Front is concerned, we want a decisive victory. But as far as the Western Front is concerned, we want to remain defensive. We don't want any setback in the Western Front. So the armored division there was concentrated at a place called Malot. Now, the armored division at that time had the best equipment in the Indian Army. They had the Vijayant tanks. There were 5 regiments with Vijayant tanks. 4 were with the armored division. 1 regiment, 66 armored regiment, was part of 15 infantry division, which fought over there. Again, a defensive battle. Now, coming on to the issues which took place. 11 Corps had the maximum armor. The strongest brigade at that time, as far as the armor formation was concerned, was a brigade called 14 In-Depth Armored Brigade, commanded that time by Brigadier Reggie Christian. So in his time, he was quite a legend. And unfortunately, that brigade was split entirely. One unit with another, almost down to squadrons. So they were spread from Fatehgarh Churia down to Anupgarh. The last regiment was the southernmost regiment in Anupgarh was independent recce squadron of 18 cavalry and 62 cavalry, that time commanded by, he later became a general, Vadach. So this is how it was. It was totally split in all directions. So finally what you had was very little. One regiment of his was placed under command 86th Brigade under General Gauri Shankar, and they went in to capture DBN, that was 71 Armored Regiment. 64 Cavalry was launched into operations under that time Colonel, later on he became the Chief, General Bipin Joshi, and he and one of his squadron commanders called that time Major, he also became a Lieutenant General V.K. Kapoor, split these up into what they call Purple Force, Black Force, almost akin to our combat teams. Now coming to the main area where the armor fought, where everybody knows about, is the area of Shakargarh, where you achieved a decisive victory. 65, we have an entire division launching operations there. 71, you had one brigade, 16 in-depth armored brigade, commanded by Brigadier, later General Vaidya, he had 3 regiments. Ironically, these were the same 3 regiments of his which fought in the 1965 war over there. 16 Cavalry, Pune Horse, and Hodson's Horse. These 3 regiments. 2 COs only were used in the offensive operations, Hodson's Horse and Pune Horse. And you all know very well the story of this Khetarpal over there, and the story of General Hanut, how he commanded his regiment, and General Gugiwara, who commanded Hodson's Horse. The other Centurion regiment at that time also fought in the same area where they had fought in 765 was 3rd Cavalry, which was split between Hosseiniwala, and they did an action in Sherjah Bulge at that time. And Hosseiniwala, again, it's a question that needs to be asked, is why they pulled the tanks back from the enclave, which was there the other side. And when they pulled the tank back, they exploded the bridge and the tank fell into the Satluj at that time. So, I mean, there are a whole lot of issues that have taken place, and it's something to be read and to be understood. Next, we come to the division where Sir commanded 10 Div. We had 1 armored regiment there, sir. Deccan Horse, the CO unfortunately got injured. The 2IC had to take over command of the unit that time. He was a Major, H.N. Harry Hoon. He later on became a general also. Another regiment which was part of 2nd Armored Brigade, 3rd Armored Brigade, had to be sidestepped. 72 Armored Regiment. They both fought an integrated action at that time to stop the offensive. And you're well aware of that area, so I won't cover this. But this is how the regiments fought, and General AK is here. His independent squadron operated in the east and got a battle honor. I think that's the only independent squadron which got the battle honor over there. So, I mean, these are things, there is no doubt the armor fought extremely well. And okay. So the last thing I'd like to say is what General Tit Sharma wrote in the book as the forward, and that's something very, very important because that holds lessons even today. And he said it's very easy to start a war, but once started, it's very difficult to end conflict. And on the terms advantageous to oneself, a good general must plan for conflict termination. And I think at that time, what we did see is the generalship of our chief at that time, General Manekshaw, how he had planned for conflict termination, how he pulled back our troops, and how he told the people, you know, no plunder, don't get yourselves involved with anything, and keep away from everything. And I want you not to have hatred in your minds when you go in. I think.
Thank you, Jagat. I think we had a very comprehensive view covering land, air, and sir, it'll be an honor if you could do the concluding.
Okay. I wonder how much each of you will carry away from this discussion. Will you remember what we had said? The reason is history is not everybody's cup of tea. And I would like to end on a note not planned for, because I was supposed to talk only about the Navy. But I'd like to talk to you about my battalion and what we did in 71. We had a corps commander, General Sagat Singh, who was one of the most eminent strategists of the Indian Army, and he was a very impatient man. He wanted to be in Dacca, first to be in Dacca. So the battalion, my battalion, I was not there, I was in Staff College at that time. The battalion was tasked to capture a place called Atgram. We had no artillery. So the CEO, a brilliant, wonderful person called Arun Harolekar, decided to launch. I'm telling you this because this you'll remember. Personalized accounts. So what we did, he launched a midnight attack, and the weapon he used was the Gurkha Khukri. That night, Khukris flashed, and we lopped off 32 Pakistani heads. Those who survived ran back and told their compatriots, don't mess with the Gurkhas, you're likely to lose your head. After that, we were told, because in war, when you do well, you're given a more difficult task. And we were tasked to capture a place called Ghazipur, where another battalion had failed. We captured Ghazipur at great cost. We entered the war with 18 officers. By this time, 3 had been killed and 4 had been wounded. So only 11 officers were left. So the CEO was trying to get together to reorganize the battalion when Sagat Singh said, the brigade which is holding Sylhet has moved for the defense of Dacca. I want Sylhet to be occupied. Send in the Gurkhas. So the CEO said, have a heart. Give me time to reorganize. There is no time. Move immediately. So in war, you can push up to a point. After that, orders are orders. So we were the first. I'm cutting this short. It's a long story. We launched India's first heliborne operation. The CEO was told, see, you need to understand that when you launch a paradrop or a heliborne attack, you need to be linked up within 48 hours. If not, the force will disintegrate due to casualties, lack of food, lack of water, lack of ammunition, lack of evacuation of casualties. We were never reinforced. We fought for 9 days. We fought for 9 nights with no food, with no water, with diminished ammunition. But somebody came to our rescue. And that was the British Broadcasting Corporation. The reason being, one of the defense correspondents perhaps didn't know the difference between a battalion and a brigade. And he said on the broadcast that a brigade of Gurkhas has landed at Sylhet. We were listening, and so were the Pakis. So we decided, let's bluff them that we are a brigade. So we spread out the battalion. It has its own implications of security because you're weakening your defenses. And finally, on the 15th of December, 2 Pakistani officers came with white flags wanting to surrender. The CEO was concerned that if they find out how thin we are on the ground, they might change their mind. So he told them, tell them to go back. We will continue the fight. I've got no orders to accept your surrender. Then the officer said, can we talk to the brigade commander? There was no brigade commander. So we got on the radio to the brigade commander and said, for God's sake, come and take the surrender. The CEO told them, we come tomorrow at the same time. So the brigade commander came in a chopper, and the Pakistani brigade commander said, is helicopter mein kaun aaya? Who has come in this chopper? So the commander, Brigadier Quinn, said, I have come. Why? He said, but aren't you here? He said, no. Where are you? I'm 100 miles away. Then who is here? So he said, it's a Gurkha battalion, not a Gurkha battalion, half a Gurkha battalion. So they got the shock of their lives and they were much murmuring, kaisa ho sakta hai? How can it be? And we got the shock of our lives when 3 brigadiers, 2 full colonels, 173 officers, 290 JCOs and 8,000 troops surrendered to us. By that time, our strength was just 352. So there are lots of stories, but so little time. It's all in my book, 1971. I just got a message yesterday from Penguin that it's gone into its 3rd print. So if you need to know more about this war, you can read all the books written by all of us. Yeah.
Sir, I don't think there can be any words after this. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much for such a wonderful and engrossing stories from all 3 of you.
I agree with you, sir. Also, your life summary in 1 hour, just not enough. It takes a lot. And the kind of anecdotes, I mean, I'm too small to comment on it, but to be in presence of all of you and hear all those anecdotes up front, right, up and close, I mean, for all of us, let's give them a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Their eyes were lighting up when they were speaking about their experiences. It takes a lot to be, be where they are today. Thank you for presenting the mementos and request you for a picture.